Generally calm people of Reddit, what made you lose your absolute shit that time? In healthcare you get yelled at a lot for stupid stuff. Where's my ginger ale? Fuck that doctor. He's an asshole for taking too long, etc. But one patient crossed the line. She didn't like that I called the previous hospital she was at the night before to get her records, so I could see what was done. Completely legal, done all the time, so things aren't missed or repeated unnecessarily, and yes, she signed a release, so we could do it. She then came out of her room and threw a full styrofoam cup of her urine at me. Dodged it by a millimeter, but it ruined a computer monitor. She then said, "Beach, I'ma leave here and fuck up your family." Done. She'd lost. Screamed for security and personally put her back in her room with the help of every tech and nurse in the emergency department. 4-point restrained her for her out of control behavior that was a danger to the staff and called the police. Once we got the records from the previous hospital we found out she pulled the same act to a lesser degree the night before. After she was medically cleared, the police took her to jail, and my final words to her were, "Good luck in the clink. They love the urinators there." She was charged with battery and given jail time for that, and multiple parole violations. TLDR, someone threw their urine on me, and I sent them to jail. I was in charge of a rollover trainer once at a military training site. Think of a Humvee on an axle that spins, like a rollover accident. Part of the safety brief, before anyone goes in, is to empty their pockets of all items. Take any items on belts off. We have rubber items inside to simulate sheet flying. We do this for safety's sake. Part of the training is we stop the trainer on its side/roof, so the participants can get exposure to assisting the other passengers and exit the vehicle safely and quickly. It's been a long ass boring as sheet day. It's got, and like all good army training, I'm hungover and irritated. All officers, and they aren't listening for sheet. We stop the exercise on the roof for a group, and they all exit, except one who can't undo the set belt. I opened the door and reach in and placed my hand on a dual-edged 4-inch boot knife. I absolutely lost my sheet. I saw red, my ears burned, and I distinctly remember seeing one of the other instructors mouth "oh sheet." I chewed out every faking officer there, all of whose outranked me, many of whom outranked my commander. Didn't matter, as my position was safety officer. I went on a tirade. I turn around after it was done, and my best friend is faking recording it on his phone. That prick showed that clip the rest of the week, and 4 years after him. I miss that faker every day. Updates. Sadly, that video is long gone. I imagine yes, I'm former military, gladly retired. I had a similar experience when I was a combat weapons instructor in the F. A group of pilots came out to the range for their annual qualification and were generally a bunch of dicks the whole time. I was a lowly senior airman, fresh out of tech school, and was understandably a little nervous about having so many officers as students. One guy in particular was literally major as whole. He told me he didn't need some girl to explain to him how to work a sidearm because he'd been doing this for years. Blah, blah, blah. Undeterred, I went through the proper procedures and instructions prior to moving to the line for live fire. Just before my boss began to call out instructions to the shooters, Major Asshole turned around and pointed a fully loaded, ready to fire 9mm directly at my chest so he could tell me he had sweat in his eye. I quickly took his weapon, secured it, and told him to get back on the bus because he just failed the course for pointing a live weapon at his instructor. He laughed and told me to calm down, little girl. At this point, I briefly considered just shooting the son of a bitch, but my boss jumped down from the podium and informed him that he had, in fact, failed for pointing his weapon at me. I enjoyed watching him stomp off to the bus as his fellow pilots cheered at him. I'm a bit more quick to anger these days, but as a child I was fairly quiet and such. When I was in 6th grade, I think, I was always forced to go to church every Sunday and Wednesday. Perks of growing up in the Bible Belt. I've always been a pretty heavy reader, and like most kids at that time I was heavily into the Harry Potter series. The people at the church my mother forced me to attend decided that those books were not only of the devil himself, but also surely corrupting me. They took every opportunity to tell me so. Making matters worse, the son of my Sunday school teacher decided he was responsible for correcting my devilish ways. In addition to harassing me about these books every chance he got, he also began getting physical about it. I pretty much just let it all go, because it was just a bunch of idiots. What did I care? That is, until he spit in my face. Twice. I chased him down and proceeded to beat the shit out of him. I've only been in a few fights, but I've never been in one where I was this absolutely livid. He never bothered me about my choice in books again. I stopped being forced to go to church, so I guess it all worked out okay. I worked at a diner with an open kitchen. You can see us, and we can see you. I'm the only cook during the lunch rush. When I hear a lady shout hey, I look over, and a lady sitting in a booth points at me and then does a very condescending come here motion with her finger. I thought something was wrong with her food, so I decide I can run out of the kitchen, leaving 4 orders on the grill, and see what I need to fix. She has no food on her table. She holds her blue soda cup out to me and asks, what is this? Oh, excuse me? Why is my root beer in a soda cup and not a mug? I don't know, I'm just the great another faking idiot in this faking place who doesn't know anything. She then proceeds to chew me out because I, the cook, do not know why the server gave her root beer in a cup. We had special root beer mugs, but the servers couldn't find them. Someone misplaced them. I apologize and head back into the kitchen while she's loudly talking crap about me to the next booth to find that all of my orders are ruined and more had been coming in. It's already stressful working in a kitchen and that was the last straw. I went in back, started screaming and kicking the shit out of the walk-in cooler. When I went back out everyone was quiet and avoided eye contact. Even the lady with the issues still looked pretty mad though. I rushed through the orders and thank God she left without saying anything. I didn't get in trouble though, since my manager was serving and had to deal with her as well. He understood. My car broke down yesterday. I was stuck on the side of the highway on a bridge with no exact reference to where I was. Called roadside assistance. They couldn't help cause I didn't know my location, so I ended up calling 911. They say an officer is coming, so in the meantime I call back insurance to try to get the tow truck. At this point I've been in my car for about 40 minutes just exhausting and panicking, but I finally get connected and explain how I'm on the side of the road. I'm okay but 911 is coming cause I don't feel safe in my location. I explain how I just want to give them my location so I can get my car towed. And the lady says your guitar? You have to get your guitar. I flipped. It was a mixture of crying and yelling, but I was shouting, are you serious? My car. My guitar? This went along for a couple minutes. Now I ended up apologizing later and explained how I was just scared, but geez lady, yeah, I'm broke down on the side of the road and I need to get my guitar towed. Edit. For clarification purposes, I knew where I was, but not exactly where I was. I didn't call 911 cause I was lost. I called to get an officer come help me because cars were getting really close and I knew it'd be at least an hour before any tow truck came. After I called 911 and told them my location, they helped me specify my exact mile marker. Even with that information, insurance was still unable to help me. I told the officer what I told the insurance company, and at that point the officer asked me if I just wanted him to get a tow truck, and I said yes. In the 8th grade I decided to join the school wrestling team. I was overweight and not very good at wrestling, but I still tried. Every day after practice, while waiting for parents to pick us up, I would get picked on by any of a number of the other team members. One day one of the guys decided to take it to the next level and punched me in the face 3 times. I stood there stunned with my ears ringing, and then rage took over. He was wearing a hoodie sweatshirt, and with my left hand I reached over and grabbed the hood, pulling it over his head so his face was pointing down, and held tight while delivering uppercuts to his face in rapid succession while he tried to escape running backwards. I held on tight and kept hitting his face while the crowd watched me in amazement. After what seemed like around 15 straight punches to his face, I finally let go and he continued to run backward. He stopped running backward after a few seconds, then came running back towards me. I'm thinking, oh great, here we go again. He got about halfway back to me and let out a wail that sounded like a combined scream and wolf howl, and then dropped to the ground crying. I turned around to a crowd of wide-eyed and stunned bystanders and walked to the door while they tended to him. The next day he came to school with 2 black eyes swollen shut and bruises all over his face. The wrestling coach basically told the team to stop messing with me, and that was literally the last time I ever got into a physical fight. That was nearly 40 years ago. I lost my sheet one time when I was little, somewhere in the 5 to 10 range. That doesn't sound out of the ordinary, but I was a quiet reserved kid who didn't do much out of line. Anyway, I have an older brother who tormented me all the time. This day he had been particularly sheety, but I still just took it and coped. My mom made burritos for dinner. I love burritos, but only if it's well put together. Sloppy sandwiches drive me nuts. Anyway, my brother and I are sitting down, waiting for my parents to sit at the dinner table too. My brother sees that I'm excited and is a bit privy to my sandwich pet peeve, so he takes just his index finger and smashes it down on my burrito as hard as he can. I get upset, so then he just open palm smashes the burrito on my plate into an absolute mess. I lose my sheet and whip the burrito at him, missing and nailing the wall. Parents walked in just when I threw the burrito on the wall. They freeze, and then instead of yelling at me, they immediately ask my brother, "What did you do to him?" Hearing that I would not be punished, and that they knew it was my brother's fault without seeing what happened, made it a little bit better. I don't think I ever ended up getting a burrito that night, though. My son was maybe 8 months old and had recently diagnosed as profoundly deaf. Deaf kids will often inhale to make vibrations and noise that they can somewhat hear for stimulation. We were on pins and needles as I had just lost my job and our insurance, and the cochlear implant surgery was going to cost us $170k. We'd have to sell the house and one of the cars. We needed a break and our in-laws took us to the food court at a local mall. Our boy started to inhale and gasp. "He needs a beating," a fat 20-something said no so quietly to her friends at the table next to us. I rarely curse in public, and I'm generally non-confrontational, but a stream of insulting profanity issued from my mouth for a good 10 minutes that would have put a sailor to shame. I found it couldn't stop, and it got on the verge of Bukowskian poetry. I insulted her, her mother, her weight, and her pinched-faced friends. I launched into the smell of her TW, at how fat she was, how she'd only be able to reproduce with a blind drunk moron with a death wishes she was uglier than the devil's asshole on fire with the sheet of hell. And it only progressed from there. F. Liam's Marine drill sergeant from Full Metal Jacket would have told me to tone it down a bit. I told her he was deaf, and that we couldn't stop it. And this was a goddamn food court in a pissant southern town filled with pissant inbred mother faking hell-spawned redneck ignorant mutant troglodytes that embarrass normal troglodytes. The food court was silent and all the eyes were upon us, and then it progressed from there. She got up and left crying. I can honestly say the whole round was involuntary, like a pus-filled boil popping and draining in a torrent. I had never done anything like this before, and have not done it since. I feel bad for her to this day. Was a camp executive at my high school and was responsible for the entire guys side during our week-long camping trip. As a quick backstory, there were 7 execs, 3 boys and 4 girls, in charge of about 140 students. The teachers had divided the girls and guys sides into different colors to make various groups for the activities we'd be doing all week. Out the 140 students we had to watch over, there were about 40 leaders, those that were to monitor their respective teams, and the rest were campers. For the most part, the majority of the guys were pretty chill, a little loud, but were following the rules. I don't mind a little noise, as long as everyone's in their rooms. When lights out happens, the time whereby no one should leave their cabins at night, unless to use the restroom. However, there was this one cabin, the faking purple team. Lord help me here. I kept getting noise complaints from the other leaders regarding the purple team's cabin to the point where the teachers were getting frustrated with us execs. If the campers make too much noise, it was the job of the leaders to handle it. If they can't, then the execs have to step in. If execs can't handle it, then the teachers have to step in, and no one really wants that point. So I've gotten multiple complaints from almost every team about the purple team that I go in to check it out. As soon as I stepped inside, not only was it loud, but there was a distinct smell, a very earthy smell. I flipped the fuck out. Not because I have any problems with marijuana, but because if the teachers were to come down, this trip would be over before it even started. I don't think I've ever gotten that angry in my life before. And I don't think I got another noise complaint the rest of the week. The way I had been detained during the 12th of June protests in Moscow last year. The actual protest was on Tverskaya Street. It is normally a huge street with heavy car traffic, but on that day it was blocked and full of people. The thing went super smooth. We had good time with friends. It was pretty calm. The thing ended, and we decided to go home. We went from Tverskaya Street into the neighboring small side street, went to a bar, had a beer. It was all nice. We were happy no one has been in contact with police. Then we walked around a little and decided to go home. At that point the protest has been over, but the OMON forces were still there. So I notice on our way a lonely police officer, come to him and ask if we can get this way to the closest subway station. I can see it in about 600 meters in front of me, or it is closed. It might have been, who knows. He is polite and says it is okay and we can go there. I thank him, turn right, and start walking towards the subway station. Next thing I see is 4 OMON guards marching towards me on the street in a line. For some reason I'm in front of my group by about 4 meters, I guess I was rushing to finally go home. That was a mistake. So I obviously don't want to get in the way of the guards and go to the sidewalk, but they probably interpreted it as me trying to escape from them. Even though they were just going somewhere, they weren't walking towards specifically me. So the next thing that happens is that 2 of them in a matter of second rush towards me, kick me on the ground, then lift me up and bring me to the side of the police bus where they rudely search me and call me names and then throw into the thing. All of that with my girlfriend screaming on top of her lungs behind me in fear. I can't see her, but just hear her voice. Just the way they did it, and the whole situation pisses me off to this day. It wasn't even in the place of the protest, so I might have just been a random dude whom they found. Like I could be a part of the protest, because of my age. I had no attributes like flags or posters, was dressed in a very neutral way, and just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time point. If you are interested, what happened next is that I sat in that bus for an hour, then we went to a police station on the other side of the city, sat in the bus some more. There were about 10 detained people in my bus, on the territory of the police station. Then some good cop bad cop for about 2 hours and they release me. 3 months later I get a fine of about $400 for taking a part in an unlawful protest via mail. At least I didn't get beaten and they're typus. Lived with 4 people in college, a 2-bedroom with 2 of us sharing rooms. My roomie was awesome, but we only had 3. Enter Justin. Justin was a hot sheet sandwich topped with a drug record and a room at Panshan for porn involving girls between 14 to 16, justifying it by claiming they are adults and America is just too uptight. These shitty trays aside, the roomie staying in the smaller room couldn't afford half the rent and knew Justin's girlfriend, so he moved in, much to my protest. He hated me for calling him on his bullshit, and I hated him for, well, read above. I don't judge other women when they date assholes, but I was also friends with his girlfriend, and she was severely mistreated by him verbally and sometimes, rumored, physically, though he's a bussy short stack and weak muscled, and despite vanity missiles, could barely defend himself. Fast forward to the 3rd week he's put off trash duty. First 2 weeks we covered for him. On the 3rd weekend he planned a trip up north to drink with his frat buddies and didn't wanna hang with gals. So I get it. But we told him he has to do the trash first. Saturday. I wake up, 8 AM, early for college kids. I see duffel bags in the living room, and he walks in to grab the last one and leave for his trip. Trash still spilling over. He makes an excuse he is too busy, and will get it when he gets back 3 days later, right? I stand to stop him from leaving and admittedly, I'm a tall woman at 5 minutes and 11 seconds, and was skinny at the time, but still stronger than this little sheet, much to his anger. He tries to push me out of the way, and I put my hand to his face, knowing it'll get him to swing, and sure enough he slapped me, and called me a bitch, claiming that by not moving I made him do that. Well, right after he finished that sentence, I sent my fist through, not at, but through his face. broke his orbital bone on his right side of his skull, and fractured the nose. He looked like hamburger face for the whole frat weekend after the urgent care trip and never turned me in. Claimed he fell skiing because he never could admit a girl whooped his ass joke was on him. By the time he got back, myself and his then ex-girlfriend had spread the word and he never lived it down entirely. To this day it's in my top 3 proudest moments. I hate violence, but I love when I get to stick it to a monster and cause them a life of shame. During a group project during last year of what would be high school I had been feeling pretty depressed for a while, and during that time all my emotions were locked away and kept boiling as if they were in some sort of pot. 2 girls in our group decided the day before the actual presentation that it would be a great idea to make some sort of performance, and I said that there simply wasn't enough time to practice. The 2 girls got slightly angry/irritated that I was willing to give up the idea so easily, so they decided to call the teacher for something like a group meeting. During the meeting I told them about my thoughts and my reasoning, and these 2 chicks decided to blame every problem on me, even though I had finished everything I was in charge of. The last line they said was, "Don't sit there and feel sorry for yourself," and the pot boiled over, releasing every single emotion that had been stirring and came out as anger. I smashed my hand down on the table and most likely spouted some profanities that they most certainly didn't deserve. Not their fault. I was feeling like shit. As I walked out I punched one of the tables fairly hard so that the bubble gum that had been stuck underneath fell down on the floor, and then I walked out. The 2 girls started crying. My best friend laughed his ass off, and the other 2 girls were just shocked. Some time passed and I apologized, but I'm actually quite happy that the whole thing happened, simply because they made me feel emotions again, something which I hadn't felt in a very long time. Edit. Minor spelling mistakes have been fixed, and thanks to you/shameless sad Asher for not letting the story sound like a discovery of a new king towards the end. So earlier this year, my health insurance got messed up. I started making too much money to qualify for my state's Medicare, so healthcare.gov requested a notification from NJ Familica to confirm I wasn't on it anymore. So in January, I called them to get said notification. They say yeah, you should get it in a couple weeks. It never comes. Unfortunately I had forgotten about it until healthcare.gov sends me a message that they are going to raise my insurance costs if I don't get them the message in the next 2 weeks. So I call NJ Familica again and explain to them the situation. They once again claim they are going to send me the notice and don't. So now, after getting an extension from healthcare.gov about this, I call up NJ Familica once more and attempt to explain the situation, politely requesting the cancellation notice. But the woman on the phone gets an attitude with me saying some stupid shit like you know this is the cancellation department, right? And I lost my sheet. What the fuck is your problem? I don't understand why the fuck you can't just send me this faking letter. What's happening over there? Just look in the faking file and cancel it. Yes, you bitch. I know this is the cancellation department. I want a notice that it's cancelled. I must have scared the shit out of her, because the next thing she said was, "I'll go get my supervisor who solved the problem in 10 minutes, and I got my cancellation notice 3 days later. When I was at college I was at a party with a bunch of friends. My friend Emma and I took a break from the hot mess inside and went out for a smoke. I went over by this one group of friends that I knew, and Emma went off by herself to talk to other people. About a minute later she comes up to me and asks me if she could bum a cigarette. I asked her how she managed to finish so quickly, since I was usually the one that was done first. She pointed over to this one guy and said he knocked hers out of her hand and told her she was too pretty to smoke. I recognized the guy from earlier in the night. He was in town visiting one of the guys that lived in the house where the party was being held. The guy he was visiting was a guy I like to play beer pong with, so I decided to hold my tongue and just give her another cigarette. She came back again very soon after and asked me for another cigarette. The guy apparently did it again to her, even though she wasn't even trying to talk to him and was standing like 5 feet away from him. Emma was a very close friend of mine, and I just got fed up So I went over to the guy and said, "Hey man, what's your faking problem?" He replied by saying that smoking was bad for you and he was looking out for her. I told him, "Look man, she is capable of making her own decisions. I know you're here visiting Luke and I like Luke, so I don't want any problems. But if you knock her cigarette from her hand one more time, we are going to have a problem." He backed off and left her alone for the rest of the night. I'm sure in his head he had this idea that what he was doing was a cute way of flirting, but he was just being a dick. The next day he found me and apologized for the way he acted. He was just drunk and being an idiot and wanted me to pass along his apology to Emma too because he couldn't find her. It's always felt like my parents never wanted me. I was a surprise honeymoon baby born 9 months and a day after their wedding. I was regularly screamed at for anything I did until I just started hiding. I was called the practice child my whole life. My younger siblings got way more love and attention, etc. In my teens they started taking in strays. If any neighborhood kids didn't want to go home, they could just be at our house all the time. Effectively, my mother would take my friends away from me to be her friends instead. One of which was a kid who picked on me constantly from the time I was 11. I guess they had that in common point: that guy was kicked out of his dad's house and his mom's house when he was 20, so my parents took him in permanently. That killed me, but I always wanted their approval, so I was always calm and agreeable, always desperately trying to figure out how to get them to love me, so I went along with it. Years later, I'm married and have a son. This guy still lives with my parents. They continue to coddle and make excuses for him while criticizing me for whatever they feel like. One day, we are all at my parents' house and my son is being a goofy 2-year-old, which annoys the man-child living there. So he gets furious, picks my son up by his ankle, and spanks him. My parents claimed not to have seen it. We went home. I couldn't sleep that night because I was so upset. The next morning, I made sure the guy and my mom would be at home, and why wouldn't he be there? And I went to confront them with my wife. I dumped everything I had been putting up with on them for about an hour, including asking how my mom could allow this jerk to hit my son. She maintained that it didn't happen, so I went through the roof. I ended up crying because of all the pent-up emotion, so my fantastic wife took over. She said we wouldn't be coming back if the guy still lived there, so he yelled that he would move out, and he stormed off after saying he didn't have to listen to this. My parents convinced him not to move out shortly after we left. My mother expressed how disappointed she was that I didn't come to have a conversation and only came to dump on them. That was her big takeaway from everything I said. That I wasn't being fair to them. We went to counseling with them later. For months. It validated everything I had felt, but they never stopped lying and being defensive. One counselor said we should be on Dr. Phil. The other counselor said my mom is incapable of empathy. Both counselors called my parents delusional. But of course my parents didn't take any of that seriously. At one point my dad asked me who does he think he is to judge us like that, as if he forgot that that's their job. Haven't spoken with them in almost a year, and life is so much better. This happened in some club ages ago. I was bouncing around on the dance floor with everybody else and apparently stepped on some dude's foot who had been standing there with his posse of 2 or 3 other guys watching people. I shrugged and apologized, then turned around to leave. Right then somebody smacked me in the back of the head. Not hard, but too hard to ignore. I turned around still calm and said something like, "Look, I'm gonna walk this way, you guys stay here and nothing more needs to happen." Turned around again, got smacked in the head again. I was very much pissed off at that point. It didn't help that they looked at me all innocent. I couldn't even tell which one of them did it. So I just stuck my finger in the face of the dude whose foot I allegedly stepped on and recommended he don't do it again. Turned around once more, waiting to get smacked in the head again. This time they poured a glass of beer in my back. That's when I completely lost my shit. Threw myself around and went straight at the guy. I was in full rage mode, didn't care what happened next, as long as that guy suffered. I could tell by the terrified look on his face he realized he had gone too far. His friends never stepped in to help him. After a while people separated us, and that was that point. I have no sympathy at all for people who resort to violence for solving their problems, but feel no shame for having snapped in that situation. I think I did everything in my power to avoid what eventually happened. I had a job filling vending machines in my mid-30s and was servicing one of my larger accounts that we called full service. Basically they had soda, snack, and cold food machines. Most of the customers, while on their break, would come over to me and request certain items. That was not a problem. But there was this one guy that would take it too far. A 21-year-old, know-it-all. He would stand next to me during his break, and he would constantly tell me how to do my job better, and tell me about complaints other employees had, but they were not telling me in person. Those complaints almost seemed made up, just so he can have something to say. So one day, while I had the food machine door open, and I was checking the expiration dates of the milk, he kept interrupting me and telling me to not miss the dates on the milk, and to make sure there is an even amount of chocolate and whole milk. I lost it. I stood up, and I got right in his face. I didn't yell, but I said loudly enough for others to hear, "Why do you always come over here and nug me while I'm trying to do my job? How would you like it if I went and started jumping up and down on the bed while your mom was trying to do her job?" He got extremely red and looked like he wanted to hit me. Then he walked away. I immediately shut and locked all of my machines and left. I called my really good friend who was a supervisor at the time and told him to be expecting a phone call because I'm probably going to get fired. Never got the call, and the kid finally left me alone. I can remember that day like it was yesterday. I was home packing my stuff to get ready for when my husband was out of basic training. I never yell or even raise my voice to hardly anyone ever. My dad has always had a wicked temper, and my sister also had a knack for starting yelling matches with him. One night, she forgot to do something she was supposed to, and the yelling started again. I ignored it up until he called her stupid. It got under my skin, so I spoke up a little saying that he shouldn't call her that. He hollered back, "You are my daughters. I can talk to you however I want." That's when I snapped. I saw Ed for the first time in my life, and I completely lost it. I screamed back at him at how I was tired of him treating us like garbage when he lost his temper, at how we hid in the back room with my mom until he cooled off, and how all I wanted was to visit my family before I had to move over 12 hours away from them. I also threatened that if he ever wanted to see me again, then he needed to shut up and sit in the corner until he was done throwing a fit. I yelled at him for the first time in my life for a solid 30 minutes. I didn't stop until everything I had to say, built over the years, was out, and I saw him go from red-faced angry to what seemed to be guilt-ridden. When I finally stopped, he was quiet. He didn't say a word and walked away. Shortly after I moved out, he went to a doctor and has been put on some medication to help with his anger issues. Now he's super friendly, and I haven't heard him throw a tantrum like he used to in over 10 years now. He has never spoken poorly to me or my sister since then either.